So today we are going to talk about some basic irrigation repairs. If some of these things are things that you still don't feel comfortable with doing on your own, you can always hire someone to come and make some of these fixes for you. But hopefully this will give you a little bit of an idea of some of the basic repairs that can be done with an irrigation system and kind of what to look for with the irrigation. So we are going to talk about some spray heads and drip irrigation and different kinds of piping and how to fix those, and some of the more common valve problems that we see, at least here in the garden. So some of the things that cause problems with irrigation systems are like lawnmowers, shovels when you're digging to put a plant in the ground, hedgers, and other equipment. They can all break different parts of a system. If water is left in the lines over the winter, it can freeze and cause breaks. As trees get older and grow bigger, their roots can break different parts of the system as well, especially the pipes underground, and they can also pinch some of the drip lines sometimes. And then also, as the system gets older, it can have more problems with breaking just because of the age of the materials. So we're first going to talk about when to check your system, and then we're going to talk about the things to look for. So when you're first starting up the irrigation system in the spring, we would recommend that you run every zone for about 10 minutes so that any breaks or leaks underground can have some time to come to the surface and make themselves known. And then we also suggest that you check the system at least monthly, because often the irrigation runs in the middle of the night, and so things might be broken that you don't know about unless you turn it on during the day to check the system and make some of those basic repairs so that we're not wasting water. And then as a best practice, we would recommend that you do it weekly. So at least monthly, but preferably weekly to check the system. And on those weekly checks, you can run it for just a minute or two, maybe as you're mowing your lawn. It would be a good time to also take a minute or two to just turn on every zone and just get a visual check on it and make sure you don't have any geysers shooting into the air from broken sprinkler heads. So here are some of the things that you want to look for. So you want to make sure that the sprinkler heads are aligned correctly. You're looking for any obvious breaks or really wet or really dry areas. So if you watch your plants, the symptoms of overwatering and underwatering are very similar. So don't just turn up the water. You should go out and feel around at the base of the plants, see if it's really, really wet or if it's really, really dry, so that you can adjust the water appropriately, because overwatering and underwatering can both kill plants. And so you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing to correct that issue. And as you walk around your landscape, you'll want to notice if there are areas that feel like a pillow or a marshmallow, because that could indicate a leak. And then also looking in the valve boxes to see if there's any water in there or leaking valves. Sometimes the water will be coming from a break that's a little bit down the line from the valve box, but an easy channel for the water to move through is along that pipe straight back to the valve box sometimes, and that can be an indication that there's a leak somewhere. Here are some of the tools that are helpful to take around with you as you're checking your irrigation system. The channel locks can help with some adjustments of alignment of sprinkler heads and making sure that the caps are tight. Having gloves with rubber grip can be helpful because when the sprinkler heads get wet, they get quite slippery, and it can help to just get a better grip on them. Irrigation flags are useful if you don't have time to fix the issue right away or you need to run to the store to get a part. You can flag where the issue is so that you can remember and not have to find it again. Having a notebook and a pencil to keep track of some of the breaks and some of the problems or things that you want to keep an eye on can be helpful as well. And then a small flathead screwdriver for some sprinkler head adjustments can also be beneficial. All right, so now we're going to talk about some sprinkler heads. So there are 3 types of sprinkler heads that we are going to talk about. The first is a fixed spray head, and then those tend to be less efficient, but are a little bit more budget friendly to install. Rotors run for a longer period of time, but they are more efficient. And then the rotary nozzles are a good way to make the fixed spray heads more efficient because you can just switch out the nozzle and they are more efficient than the fixed spray. They also will run longer than the fixed spray heads. So now that we've talked about some of the different types of spray heads, we're going to go over some of the problems that we can run into with them that make the system less efficient and can lead to dry spots in the landscape. And the first one is when heads are low, they can get blocked by plant material or the grass, or not come up all the way, and that can lead to dry spots and uneven watering. So to fix this, you'll need to dig around the head just a few inches, just enough so that you can unscrew it and get your hand down in the hole. And then you're going to use either a cutoff riser or a riser extender to raise the height of the head. So cutoff risers can be cut to whatever height you need, where the riser extenders are kind of a set height, but you can add multiple on top of each other, like in this photo. Sorry, my voice is cutting out. So I personally like the riser extenders better. I have a hard time cutting the cutoff risers and not influencing the threads. And so then it becomes really difficult to get the pieces back together if the threads aren't working right. Another problem that can happen with spray heads is that sometimes they're installed tipped, or the ground settles and they get a little bit tipped. And that can also lead to uneven spraying and dry spots. And you want the heads to be at the same angle as the surface that they're watering. And with the spray heads, they water flat areas a lot better than they do slopes. And so in order to fix this, you would dig up the head and then use a swing joint to adjust the angle to straighten it out. So don't worry, we're going to talk about swing joints next and what those are. So the swing joint you can see in the picture on the right. In this picture is a funny pipe that is connected to a spray head with the threaded couplers, which are shown in the middle picture. But sometimes when you're unscrewing these connections, sometimes they break off inside of the head, or maybe it got run over by a lawnmower, or it's beside the driveway and it got run over by a car and it broke that piece inside of the head. And so then you could either replace the whole head because the opening is blocked, or you can use this plastic riser extractor, and it just jams up inside of that broken off threaded piece and gives you the leverage and kind of grips that piece so that you can unthread it with that tool. So with swing joints, you can make small height adjustments as well as adjusting the angle of the spray head. They can also add some flexibility, and we'll see if this video will play. So this is kind of how a swing joint works. You can see that it tips in multiple directions. This particular swing joint is on a solid riser, so it doesn't have as much flexibility as using a funny pipe would. Here are some of the parts of a spray head. So you can see that the nozzle is the top piece, and that's where the water comes out. The riser is the piece that comes out of the spray head to a certain height. It depends on the height of your head. And you want to make sure that that's working as well as the nozzle spraying properly. The cap is the next piece, and you want to make sure that that is tightened down and not leaking too much. And then you also want to check and make sure that the body isn't leaking. So in the top right picture, you can see that that sprinkler head was hit by a lawnmower and blown to pieces. And so that whole sprinkler head would need to be replaced. But if just the cap was broken, you can replace just the top and leave the body in the ground, which is less digging, which is always nice. And in the bottom right picture, you can see how the nozzle just unscrews from the riser. It's just a threaded piece, which is nice for if you want to switch fixed spray heads to rotary nozzles. You just unscrew it and put the new nozzle on. All right, so when you take off the nozzle for any reason, the riser will fall down into the body because there's a spring that pulls it down after the water pressure is gone. So that can make it a challenge to put a new nozzle on or to put the old nozzle on after it's been cleaned. So you can use some different tools to help keep that riser up so that it doesn't fall. So there's a pop-up sprinkler repair tool that you can see in the top left corner. And that is a good tool to help pull up the riser and also to keep it up. Locking pliers are also another good option for this. You just want to make sure it's not too tight on the riser because you don't want to damage the riser. So when you turn on your system, if you notice that there are some spray heads that aren't spraying properly or not spraying at all, you might want to check and see if the nozzle is clogged or the filter. On a fixed spray head, there's a little opening where the water comes out, and you can check and see if there's any grit in there, or you can check the filter as well. This filter, you can see some particles in it. So after you see that the spray head isn't working properly, you want to remove the nozzle, keeping the riser up with one of those tools in the previous slide. And then you swish the filter around in a bucket of clean water. And once it's all clean, you can put it back on the riser and turn it back on and see if that fixed the problem. And check the other heads to see if they're clogged. Another thing you want to check with spray heads is that they are pointing the correct direction, and that they are watering the area that they are supposed to be. So with pop-up spray heads, to make that adjustment, you take the riser, and this is where gloves come in handy, or the channel locks, especially after the system has been on and the risers are wet, because you grab the riser and you turn it just with your hand or with the pliers. And the riser often makes kind of a clicking sound when you turn it, and that's okay. It's not a problem. It's just how the heads are made, that they make that clicking sound. So with some nozzles, the adjustable arc nozzles, they have one side that is kind of the start side, and that side is always the same. And then you can adjust the other side. So when you're lining up your adjustment, you want to make sure that that side is lined up with where it needs to be to water the area that you are wanting to water. Another thing to look for is rushing water and broken heads. So if you see something like this, that is a good indication that you have a problem. And this one, it looks like the riser was broken and is actually laying beside it. But that's something that can be fixed. You can try just replacing the top with the riser. And if that doesn't fix it, you might need to check the body and see if it got damaged as well. All right, so some specific things for fixed spray heads. They are designed to spray a specific distance and area. They generally come in quarter, half, or full circle coverage, but there are some that have an adjustable arc feature. So you can determine a little bit more of how much of a circle would get the water. So to adjust the throw distance, or the length that they spray on these, you can make small adjustments with the screw that is in the top, using a small flathead screwdriver. And but if you need to make some major adjustments, you probably need to switch to a different nozzle that throws longer distance or a shorter distance. With rotary nozzles, they they often have a tool like the orange one up here at the top of the page that can help make some of the adjustments to the throw distance and the arc. So this end right here, the kind of pointy end, can be used in the screw that's on top of these nozzles to adjust the throw distance. And they often have a little bit bigger range that they can adjust with the throw distance. You can also use the circle part of it. Oh, sorry, my mouse disappeared right there. The circle part of it to put over this silver piece on the nozzle that adjusts how much of the circle is being covered. If it's a quarter of a circle or a half of a circle or somewhere in between, that can help make that adjustment. You can also use your fingers for that. Rotor heads. So these can be adjusted for arc and distance and the area. They put out kind of a heavier stream of water, but they rotate kind of slowly. And so you have to leave them on longer, but they tend to be a little bit more efficient. And they are often used in larger areas of lawn. So this is what we are talking about when we refer to rotors. And there are several adjustments that can be made with these. And they can be a little complex, but hopefully we can break it down into some pretty simple adjustments that you can make to help them be more efficient and water your yard more evenly if this is the type of spray head that you have. So we're going to talk about 3 adjustments that you can make with a rotor. So the first one is the spray distance. So you can use the nozzle adjustment screw to adjust how far it sprays and also to switch out the nozzles. You can use the arc adjustment screw to adjust the spray angle or how much of a circle is being covered by that spray head. And then the lifting socket is used to lift the riser out of the head so that you can access things like the nozzle and make some of those adjustments. So here's the adjustment tool that you use with a rotor. Each brand of rotors, they have their own tool and they're all a little bit different. This is a Rainbird one because we have a couple of those at the garden, and so that's what I had access to. But that's what the Rainbird tool looks like. And then we have a little video here of how to use the lifting socket to lift the riser. So, let's see. Okay, so you put it down in the lifting socket, turn it a quarter turn, and then you can use that to lift the riser. So once it is lifted, you can use the nozzle adjustment screw to draw back the screw that you can see in front of the nozzle, which is the blue piece, to be able to remove the nozzle and clean it out if it gets clogged. So that's a closer up of the nozzle with the screw in front of it. After you put the nozzle back in, make sure you put the screw back down to hold the nozzle in place. Otherwise, as soon as you pressurize it, that nozzle will go flying across the yard. And then you might have a hard time finding it. But all rotor heads should come with a nozzle tree. So this has all different sizes of nozzles on it, and it controls the flow rate or how much water is coming out of those nozzles. So if you end up with dry spots in your yard, this is one of the things that you could check to make sure that you're getting the right coverage. Because of the way that rotors work, they rotate at the same speed no matter how much of a circle they're covering. And so you need to have different nozzles depending on what how much of the circle is being covered. So if you have a head in the corner, so it's only spraying 90 degrees, you could use a 1 gallon a minute nozzle in that, but then you would have to put a 2 gallon a minute nozzle in one that's spraying a half circle because it's the quarter is going over that twice in the time that the half circle is being covered once. And then you would keep going. So if you had a 3/4, you would put in a 3, or if you were doing a full circle, you would put in a 4 gallon a minute nozzle. And those nozzles have the numbers on them so that you can tell what's what. And it doesn't matter what number you start with. You could start with a 2 on a quarter, and then if you just had halves for the rest of them, you could do a 2 and a 4 would work. It doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that the ratio is correct. So another thing that you can do is adjust that arc, or how much of the circle is being covered, with the arc adjustment screw, which is towards the base of the nozzle, or towards the back of the head. Sorry, not the nozzle, the head. And so you can see that in this picture. You'll want to do that adjustment while the spray head is running, so that you can see where that is spraying and what adjustment you need to make. All right, so you can also adjust how far the spray goes. And with that, you use the nozzle adjustment screw again. And depending on how far down that screw is in front of the nozzle, it can make the spray go a little bit wider and not as far. Or if it's up a little bit higher and not blocking as much of the nozzle, it will go farther. And so if it's not going far enough, because you want head-to-head coverage, so you want this spray to reach the next spray head, so that you get even coverage and not dry spots. So if it's not going quite far enough, you can make an adjustment so it sprays a little bit farther. All right, hopefully that didn't confuse you too much. Yeah, they're a little bit more complicated than they would first appear, but it's not too bad. The actual adjustments are pretty simple. So hopefully I didn't overwhelm you too much. Now we're going to move on to drip irrigation. So there are two types of drip irrigation that we are going to talk about. The first is inline drip, which has emitters built into the line at specific intervals depending on what type you buy. And then point source is where you have a blank tube and you add the emitters wherever you need them so that you water just the plants. With drip line, you want to make sure that some of the emitters are working. So you might have to move some of the mulch away so that you can see the emitters and make sure that they're working as you're doing this irrigation check. And then throughout the season, you also want to look for plants that might be struggling in areas with drip, and that could be an indication that there might be something wrong with the drip irrigation that might need to be addressed. So if the emitters are not working and they're not letting out water, one of the things to check would be the filter. All drip systems need to have a pressure regulator and a filter. Sometimes it is right by the valve, which is shown in this picture. So in this picture, you have the valve on the left, and then the pressure reducer and filter as one unit on the right. And then, so you would locate that, and you would unscrew the filter housing and take out the filter, and then you would rinse it in a clean bucket of clean water, and then you would put it back together, and hopefully that helps with the issue. If your drip system was a retrofit from spray heads, then it's a similar process where you locate and unscrew the retrofit cap, and you remove the filter and you clean it, and then you reassemble it and put it all back together, and then see if that fixes the problem. Here is another type of retrofit head, the multi-outlet retrofit. And with this one, it's the same. So you locate it, unscrew the cap in the top, remove the filter, swish it around in a bucket of clean water, and then reassemble it. You may also want to make sure that there's nothing, no debris inside of this housing, which if you need to clean out that, you could turn on the zone for a couple of seconds and let the water run through there and blow out any of the debris that might be in there, and then put it back together. So when we are identifying leaks that might be in the drip line itself, you can look for puddles or spraying water or areas where the mulch is disturbed. Like in this picture, you can see that some of the mulch is missing through this middle area. And that's an indication that you might have a problem with your drip irrigation. You also want to listen for rushing water. And also look for any holes or divots in the ground by the drip that could also be an indication of a leak. This may have been a critter, it might have been a leak, but it's something to at least give you an indication that maybe you want to check that zone and make sure that it's working properly. So if you do have damaged lines, you want to identify the damaged section and make clean cuts on both ends to remove that piece. And then you can reconnect it with drip couplers. If it's a larger piece, you may have to do 2 couplers and a new section of line in the middle. So this is what sorry, wrong button. This is what a repair on a drip line might look like. So this is just a straight piece that there was something wrong with the section in the middle. So we cut out a section and put in 2 couplers and a new piece to replace that. Here is a little bit more complicated one where it was right by a T-coupler. And so it had to be shifted a little bit, so it's a little bit closer to this line than normally it would be. But then you can see it curves away so that we get the right spacing back. And then you can see that there was also a connection here that was added to get the right length to be able to make that repair. With point source, if the distribution tubing or that blank tubing that you put the emitters in has a hole in it, it can be replaced the same way as the inline drip with just a new section of pipe with couplers on the ends. You also, with point source, if they're not working, you want to check and make sure that the tubing, if you're using a spaghetti tube, is still connected to the emitter or the manifold that it could be connected to. Like this one on the left is a manifold where they come out of the base, and sometimes as you're raking, those can get pulled out a little bit and come disconnected. So those are things to check as well. And with point source, if you notice that your plants are struggling, and they've been in for a few years, you may need to add some more emitters as the plants grow, especially with trees and shrubs. All right, so we are going to move on to some pipe breaks now. So my aunt a few years ago thought that all of her spray heads in one zone were clogged. If something is affecting every single one of your spray heads in a zone, or even just most of them, it might not be clogs. That might be a place to start, but it might be that you have a broken pipe somewhere. So things that you want to look for are if you have less pressure in the heads as you get farther away from the valve, if you have consistent puddles that just don't dry out, if something is affecting a lot of heads in the same zone, if your irrigation boxes are full of water, or if you see or hear rushing water. Something like this in the picture would also be a good indication that maybe you have a leak. You can see some of the mulch that got washed away with this leak, and then also the water that was running across the sidewalk. And this was actually a pretty big leak here at the garden last year. So when you have a broken PVC pipe, you cut out the broken piece and replace it. And anytime that you are replacing a section of PVC or installing new lines, you need to use primer and glue. So the primer softens the plastic and the glue welds the pieces together. And don't forget the primer. It does not work as well and doesn't hold as long if you forget the primer. So use the primer and the glue. And to make it convenient, sometimes you can buy them in a pack, but you still have to use both parts of it. Okay, so here's some photos of how to glue PVC lines. So you make a clean, straight cut, and then you apply an even coat of primer to the top inch or so of the exterior of the pipe, so the outside of the pipe, and also to the inside of the coupler, so the piece that you're going to put on that pipe. And then you apply glue to the same places, so the outside of the pipe and the inside of the coupler. And then you push them together and you kind of turn them a quarter turn. And after they're together as far as they can go, then you need to wait a few minutes. Depending on the brand of glue can determine how long it needs to sit before you can run water through it. But it'll say on the packaging what that wait time is. And I would highly recommend leaving it unburied until that time has passed and you're able to put water through it, and check it before you bury it. Because if there's another section of pipe that is broken right next to it, or the pieces didn't go together quite right, or you got a bunch of dirt in it or something, and it didn't actually fix the leak, or your coupler was broken somehow, you don't want to be redigging up the part that you just glued. So make sure it's a good connection before you bury it. Once PVC pipes are in the ground, because they are pretty rigid, they can be hard to replace sections of, because you can't get the leverage very well to get the pieces back together. So there is this great thing called a slip fix, which is shown in this picture, which you can use to help with this problem. And it makes it so that you don't have to dig as much to get the flexibility in the pipe. And so you glue it on one side, and then you extend it into the coupler on the other side, so that you can have it fill the space that you need without having to worry about the flexibility or rigidity of the pipe. And sometimes you have to be a little bit creative when you are fixing PVC pipe. In this one, this is actually the break that caused the mulch and the water across the sidewalk in the picture before, at the beginning of this section. And in this left picture, the before picture, at the base of this 90-degree elbow, the glue hadn't been done properly. They probably missed the primer. and it had started separating from the pipe and was leaking everywhere. But because it was in a conduit going under a sidewalk, there wasn't really space to put a slip fix on that side, and the height of it was too short for a slip fix. And then the pipe at the base is actually a 4-inch pipe, which is massive. And we could have kept digging and exposed a bigger section of that and put a slip fix in there, but that was going to be a lot more work. So we were creative, and you can see what we did with it in the after picture to be able to get a slip fix in there and be able to get the pieces back together. Another awesome tool for fixing PVC is a flexible pipe. So this is flexible enough to go around obstacles and can fix multiple angles. It can also be good for under like some tree roots. In this case, was where it went, and it gives you the flexibility to get around some of those tight spaces and to get the pipe back together properly. One of the struggles with flex pipe is that it comes in limited sizes. It comes in 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 inch. It doesn't come above 1 inch, but the slip fixes come in larger sizes. I don't know how big they come, but the biggest I have used is a 4-inch, which is pretty massive. And at a residential level, you will not be dealing with 4-inch pipes unless someone did something really weird. Likely you will be dealing with 1 inch and 3/4 inch. Those are most common. So if you don't have PVC pipe, another thing that you might have is poly pipe, which is often used in colder climates. And more in the northern part of Utah would be where you find it typically, but it can be used other places as well. If it gets a break in it, it fixes very similar to drip line. So you would cut out a piece, put a new coupler in. With the poly pipe, it does have the hose clamps. So you need to make sure that you have those on the pipes before you put the coupler in so that they're in place and ready to be tightened to hold it all together. And these fittings come in all sorts of different shapes. You can get just the straight pieces for if you're just fixing a straight piece of pipe. You can get it in the elbows and T's and with threaded areas, but they all go on the same. And in the top bigger picture, you can see tightening down the clamps. I was using a screwdriver in this one, but once they're in the ground and maybe rested a little bit, a socket wrench might be the better tool. So with these, you still want a swing joint, and you can see how that screws into the piece that is in this section of poly pipe that could have been repaired. All right, so our last section is about valves. So these are the things that control when the irrigation is, when each zone is turning on or off. So here's kind of some of the basic anatomy of a valve. So you have the bleed valve, which you can use to turn on the system manually if it's not turning on with the clock, if there's an electrical problem. The solenoid is the electrical piece of the valve, and that can also be turned if it's not coming on electronically. You can turn that and get it on manually. I would recommend using the bleed valve before you do the solenoid. Sometimes the solenoid can be a little bit tricky to get turned off. When you use these manual methods, be patient. It will take a little bit of time for the valve to actually turn off. And then the diaphragm is the piece inside the rubber piece that helps control the water movement. Before you make any repairs on a valve, you need to turn off the water. Otherwise, you will get a face full of it. And so sometimes there is a ball valve like this blue thing that the hand is on in the left of this picture. And you can turn that to shut off specific zones or groups of valves. If you don't have those near your valves, then you might have to just turn off the whole system to make your repairs. So if you are turning on your zones at the clock or with an app and it doesn't turn on, it's probably an electrical issue. So it could be a bad solenoid, which again is the electrical piece of the valve, or it could be a wiring problem. So check your wires at the clock, make sure that they're connected properly. And if your valve has a flow control, which would be another knob kind of like the bleed valve, it would be another knob kind of in the middle of the valve typically. If it has one of those, make sure that it's open so that the water can move through it, the valve. But if those things are okay and it's still not turning on, you might need to replace the solenoid, which you can buy as a separate piece. Typically, you would need to make sure that it's the one that goes with the valve that you have, but it just threads into the valve. So you just unscrew it, undo the wiring, and reconnect it, a new one. If your valve is not turning off, it could be a diaphragm problem, or the body of the valve could be cracked, which is a less common problem. Usually it's the diaphragm. So, okay. In order to fix this problem, you need to be able to get to the diaphragm. So you unscrew the bonnet or the top of it and clean out any visible debris. You can pull out the diaphragm and make sure that the inside of the valve body is clean and doesn't have debris in it. Again, if you need to, you can turn on the water for a couple of seconds, let the water kind of run through it and push any debris out. Clean off the diaphragm, make sure that it's looking good. You can reassemble it. Try that. If that doesn't work, you can buy replacement diaphragms. Again, make sure that it goes with the valve that you have. But you can buy replacement diaphragms and replace just that piece. If that doesn't fix the problem, the next step would be replacing the bonnet, which you can do if you have the same valve. You can unscrew the top from the one in the ground and the top from a new valve and take the bonnet from the new valve and put it on the valve body that's in the ground. And that can sometimes help. But if the body of it is cracked, then you would need to replace the whole valve. But I would go in steps because you don't want to create more work than you need to. And they can be more simple than sometimes they seem to fix. Very rarely does the body of the valve actually break. So usually it's a little bit easier fix than that. All right, so that is the end of the slides that I have. So if there are any questions, Mike, we can do those now. And thanks everyone for watching.
All righty, we do actually have a few. So
Okay.
one that actually just popped up a moment ago. This person says they converted spray head to drip in the fall using one of those conversion kits,
Mm-hmm.
but their system is squealing, possibly from some high pressure. They're asking if there's any idea what the problem may be or how we maybe go about addressing that.
So if it's the first time that you are turning on the system, it will squeal. It sounds kind of creepy sometimes, and can be kind of startling. It should stop after the water gets into the line. So what you hear is the water flowing into the line, pushing the air out through those emitters, and that's what causes the squealing a lot. If it continues, well, sometimes it does it just at the beginning of almost every time you turn it on. If that happens, you might have a leak somewhere that is letting air into the line. Mike, do you have any recommendations for like if it continues squealing?
I mean, if it continues squealing, it could be a sign of high pressure. But I found, especially the first time you turn those on, they squeal like a banshee, and a lot of times they squeal every time you turn them on, at least until the water starts coming out. So, but to kind of dovetail onto that question, somebody is asking if 120 psi might be too much.
Sorry, what was that?
Somebody's asking how much pressure sprinkler systems need to run off of, and if 120 psi might be too much.
Yes, I would say 120 psi is way too much. Most spray heads operate best at around 50 psi. 50, sometimes you can push it to 60, but 50 is 30 to 50 is typically what they run at. And drip line is even less, which is why you need an added pressure regulator on those. Those run at between 20 and 30 typically. So yeah, 120 is very high, and you would want to add a pressure regulator to your whole system at that point.
Great. So somebody else is asking if there's anything special they need to consider when dealing with secondary water on a drip system.
Yes. So secondary water, depending on the source of the secondary water, can have a lot more weed seeds and things in it, a lot more contaminants. And so you can get specific filters that are bigger and meant for secondary water systems. If your water is pretty clean, you might be able to get away with a regular filter with a pressure regulator, but you would have to clean the filter a lot more often.
And so a couple of people have actually asked a question that would be kind of a complex answer for us to answer in this environment, but I'm not going to throw it out there just so we can tell them kind of why we can't answer this question for them, really. But here's the question. Somebody has local scaping and somebody else is using a longer drip line, and they're both curious how long a drip line can be used per zone. Nat and I do have a little experience with this one, so the answer is complex, but go ahead, Nat.
So the reason why it's really hard to answer that question is because there's a lot of factors that go into that. You need to know the size of the pipe that is leading up to the drip line. You need to know how much water is running through the line, so the flow. You need to know, if you're using inline drip, what the spacing on those emitters are, and how many linear feet all of those things go into how many linear feet you can have off of one pipe source. So it also depends on the manufacturer and the size, the diameter of the drip line you're using.
which
Yeah.
is often dictated by your soil and then your pressure and then your flow going in the system. It's a far more complex question. I think this class is suitable for answering. So apologize for that, but yeah, it's a little more complex a question. So.
Mike, do you have any recommendations on where to go to find some of that information for the people who are wondering?
So the online calculators, I think, are supposed to help deal with this particular one. Like if you go to Netafim's site and try to download their online calculators, in theory, it should take your system pressure and system flow and soil and tell you how long those lines are. At least in theory. Sometimes we're finding that doesn't always work with all of the manufacturers. So, but I would start with manufacturer websites and know those informations like your flow, like your pressure, like your soil type to answer that particular one. So, so one last question, then we're going to get out of here. So this person has some of the connectors that have broken off inside the tubing, and so if you have any thoughts on how to get them out once they've
like
broken off.
Drip line?
Yeah, well, of any kind of tubing. So imagine a connector inside a funny pipe that is broken off flush.
Okay.
And there's no way to now grab it with a screwdriver. So
right. I would recommend cutting off that section of funny pipe or drip tubing or whatever it's in and just replacing that piece.
Yeah, that's probably the best way. So
some people try to cut it off, but that can be really hard to do without nicking the but if you're trying to save your pipe, then you wouldn't want to do that anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I would just cut it off.
Yeah, cut below the piece and maybe just put a new piece on there, so or extend it out. So yeah, that's probably the best way. So okay, so I think that is going to be it for the questions. That was a lot of fun. That worked out really nice.